45, but it was really a lot of traffic to get onto the bridge.
Okay.
So it kind of set me back a little bit, but I appreciate you being patient, and thanks to everybody. Thank you for being patient. But yeah, I did radio from 2 to 6 Pacific.
2 to 6 Pacific. What did you talk about on the radio today? A lot of Giants, a lot of Warriors. What was going on?
Well, it's the Warriors flagship station. So we talked a lot about, we had Bobby Marks on from ESPN. We talked about Draymond Green and Klay Thompson and the Warriors. We talked a little Giants as well with the trade deadline coming up. And we talked a little bit about the Albert Breer story from yesterday with the Niners. And I guess we're going to talk a lot more Niners tomorrow on the channel. Yeah, we talked a little bit about the Breer thing and how, and a little bit about Brock Purdy and him going to Jacksonville, but a lot on the Breer commentary about, basically, I don't know how much you saw that video. My son tweeted it out. I gave it a retweet.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, to me, for us, like we talk a lot of Niners, and I think we kind of just start right there, or unless you want to go in a different direction. But I just thought it was interesting the way that Breer Vish kind of reshaped the argument from who's the best quarterback, who that's kind of what we've been talking about, like to which quarterback between Darnold, Lance, and I guess Brandon Allen can best keep the Niners afloat for the first, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks of the regular season if Brock Purdy is not ready to go September 10th against the Steelers.
I think, first off, Larry, before we get into it, All In says you have 2 live shows running on your channels. Just so for the sake of logistics, I don't really know what's going on, but I just wanted to update you on that just so that you can fix the logistics there.
Okay, let me just
I'll
just go ahead. All
right. You ready to get into this? Because I think I'm sensing another 2.5-hour conversation between you and me on this topic, because I think there's so many layers to it, as there is with the 49ers quarterback situation at all times. But the point you made about the guy being the best option to fill in and kind of hold the fort down until Purdy returns, I agree with it. I think it's becoming the most apparent thing to me of this offseason. And it's that the 49ers view Brock Purdy as their franchise quarterback. If he wasn't injured, Larry, I don't know if we would be having this many quarterback conversations. I'm assuming we will be, just because we're always talking about a 3rd overall pick who they spent 3 first-round picks to acquire, not being the starter of the 49ers after 4 games. That's always going to be a topic of conversation because of what they invested. But it sounds like what he did in those 8 games, and I think everybody kind of knows this, so I'm not restating anything besides what Captain Obvious says, but it's made such an impression and an imprint on the 49ers as a football team, as an organization, that they view health as the only impediment between Brock Purdy and being the starter of this football team. I think that's the fairest statement to make about the quarterback situation right now. And with health being the only impediment, I think what Breer pointed out is that the 49ers may not look at Trey Lance as a long-term solution. And you've talked about it. So many other people have talked about it, right? You've been talking about it since last year when you talked about how you were predicting a Brock Purdy and Trey Lance quarterback competition in this offseason. So you've been predicting a situation where there might not be enough room to develop both quarterbacks. And it sounds like that's the situation that's kind of created itself, where the Niners look at Trey Lance, still see this optimum potential, but they can't leave the other guy on the bench to make this potential play itself out. And they also don't think that he is ready right now to give them a better or I don't know. Breer and other insiders seem to speculate that the 49ers believe he's not ready, as ready as other quarterbacks who have played more right now to give him the best chance to win. It was always about what his improvement would be, which I think a lot of us expected. And he obviously didn't get to improve, unfortunately, when you get hurt, 40, 100 snaps into the year.
The only thing I would push back on the Breer front, Vish, is just that Breer's like the 49ers have given Trey a lot of chances. I don't know that I would necessarily describe it like that. It is, but that we are a great distance away from his draft class. But there's been injuries. They redshirted him a year. So I mean, there's been some interruptions there. But I just think that it's becoming more apparent to me the more I read these quotes is that the 49ers look at Trey Lance and see a quarterback, and I don't know exactly what they see because I don't think they're really going to be totally transparent with the public about exactly how they feel about the player. But I think it's safe to say that the facts of his situation, which are that he played 1 year of real football since high school, has gotten to the point where it's almost as if they feel that if they gave him the starting job this year, even for 4 to 6 weeks at the beginning of the year, that because of his lack of experience, that he would make mistakes that would lead to losses, and they're not willing to do that for Trey's growth this year. And so that's why maybe Darnold and Allen are ahead of Lance in their minds, because they know that there'll be a learning curve, and they don't want to go through the learning curve in the midst of a competitive situation. So unless he just wows them against the Raiders in the practices leading into the preseason game, or unless he just wows them and shows unbelievable superiority to Allen and Darnold in the preseason, I get the sense that Trey's in his own category, that he's literally like, there's Brock who's in his own category, and then there's Darnold and maybe even Allen in the category of who's going to be the guy who can play for 4 to 6 weeks behind Brock if Brock's not ready. And then there's Trey in a third category where he's viewed as a developmental long-term project. And the guess is, and your guess is as good as mine, how long will they go with that project on their active roster before they pivot and say, it didn't work?
Yeah, that's one way to put it. I think what we are realizing ultimately is, and I think that this statement, Larry, and this is a little bit away from what you just described, but there is a rhyme and reason for why I'm bringing it up, is I think it's also important to establish that I don't know if there's necessarily a mistake, because he also got hurt, which, is one of the biggest reasons why this development is where it is. And it's kind of at a point where nobody really knows where it is, because we never got to really see that plan play out because he got hurt. But he's not where they expected him to be after 3 years, right? If he was, I don't know if he would be stuck in this weird situation where he's in a quarterback competition. And Albert Breer, I thought, described it the best. He's in this weird situation where they're finding it difficult to put him on the field, but they know that the thing that he needs is to be on the field, right? And it's such a weird situation to have a quarterback, because you know that there's certain growing pains that you have to go through, but you also know that you have to go through those growing pains with this quarterback in order to get what you get from the other side, right? You get to reap all the rewards of the possible rewards of this talent that he has. And I think that's where this situation is getting a little bit complicated. And, these were some of my concerns, by the way, not to pat myself on the back, though that's exactly what I'm doing. These were some of my concerns in regards to drafting Trey Lance, this timeline. This is why I said, do whatever you can to get Matthew Stafford that offseason, Larry. I said it over and over and over again. A veteran quarterback, that's what this team needed, going the young quarterback route. Didn't understand how the timelines work for these quarterbacks. Now, I wish I was a little bit more humble and I was capable of talking about this situation without taking a minute there to pat myself on the back, but I did do that. And so it's now become a very complicated situation for the 49ers because, Larry, I was of the mindset for the longest time this offseason. I said it with you as you and I stream almost every week on these Tuesday nights that, hey, the best thing for the Niners this offseason was Trey plays great because I don't know where Brock's injury is. But as I keep evolving and thinking about this situation, Larry, I don't know where the space is for Trey to now play great, if that makes sense. Like, I think Trey playing great also involves a certain amount of time that Trey needs to spend on the field and just understand what his skill set is relative to other NFL talent. I think that was what the goal of putting him on scout team was, that rookie of the year, his rookie year, where you can have him run a lot of different pass concepts, not just the ones within your system, right? The ones you're game planning for. And he gets to just go out there and play and naturally feel how his arm feels, what throws he can make against the defense, what he can't make, right? Jimmy Ward really complimented Brock Purdy after the Miami game. I always go back to this quote when he talked about how he did this with his time on scout team. And Fred Warner, of course, the year before said he pulled aside Trey Lance and forced him to make a few throws because they weren't getting the reps they needed. And he made strides in that area as well. So both players did, do that. And I think that they do need that year, Larry. And it's like this magical improvement that I'm saying needs to happen in an ideal situation for the 49ers. It's ideal. I don't know how that happens without him stepping on the field. So I've actually amended my entire outlook of this situation. I think now, especially knowing that the prognosis, the other reason I thought that was the prognosis with Purdy was up in the air at the time. Now that we know Purdy is reportedly exactly on track, Larry, the goal, the hope, the goal everybody should be looking for is that Brock Purdy comes back healthy. He looks like the player he was, and he just kind of resumes and removes the controversy out of this and looks like the starter. Because I think that's the most stable possible quarterback situation for the 49ers. And Larry, we were talking last week about what do the 49ers need at different positions to win the Super Bowl. And at quarterback, I keep coming back to one thing over anything else when I look at the 49ers this year. They got to be stable at the quarterback position. And I think their fastest, easiest, best outcome of stability is if Brock Purdy gets healthy. He's the same exact guy, and he just resumes being the starting quarterback, and he's the guy that they follow behind. Because I think if he comes back, he's not fully healthy, he's a little bit shaky, and now you get into a situation where you have to bench one to play the other and play this guy to play the other. You start getting – it's a risky business. It's bad things start to happen in that situation. So I know that was a lot, Larry, but for me, the name of the game is stability, and that starts with Brock Purdy coming back healthy and reasserting himself as the starting quarterback, which he proved to be over 8 games last season.
I think that's a good point. I would also say that I think where we're at now is if Trey first of all, Trey's got to have, he's not going to get any run except in the preseason for, definitive run. I mean, he might get run, but he's definitely going to get run and playing time in the preseason. The question is this: if he plays poorly in the preseason, the Niners will not want him, most likely, and nobody else will want to trade for him. The question I would have is if he plays well in the preseason, I really feel that other teams will want him, but will the 49ers want him? Because they obviously have made the decision, or at least have I got to think that if the Albert Breers and all these different people are saying Darnold, and putting Trey hey, he's behind Darnold, that on some level the 49ers have made an evaluation already before the preseason of Trey versus Darnold, and that it's Darnold. Right. And that's why all these people, national insiders, are regurgitating this Darnold is the number 2.
Exactly.
So the question is, if Trey plays poorly, I don't think the Niners want him, and I don't think anybody else will trade for him. And the Niners may have to just release him or move on. If Trey which is absolutely stunning in my mind, if Trey plays
by the way, real quick, just to add in that situation, I don't think the Niners would release him or move on. I think they would just keep him on the roster.
And that's the other question: is how long if he's struggling, or if they don't believe in him as a player, will they keep him on the roster, and for how long, and at what price, for how long? They have the ability to do it because the starter makes no money. So it's okay if you're paying your backup a lot of money, and maybe even your third string guy record setting money. But it does create kind of like a what the heck's going on here kind of a deal if your third string inactive every single week quarterback is getting paid a bigger check than both your starter and your number two guy probably combined.
Which the Niners were very sensitive to last year, right? When they brought back Jimmy Garoppolo, they brought that contract down where the base salary before all the incentives he got was below the base salary that Trey Lance got paid last year. So they wanted to create that hierarchy from a salary structure as well last year. So they were cognizant of this when they made moves in regard to this last year. Now, I think the thing with him and preseason and all of that, Larry, is that I don't know if he's necessarily right when Schefter said that there wasn't a trade market for him. I think it's more layered than it's like if I called up any team, like, for example, let's pretend that I'm connected and I can just call up a team and ask them and they'll give me a straight answer. I'll be like, do you want Trey Lance? I think in a vacuum, most teams are not going to say no to getting another talented player, regardless of what's happened before in his career, right? Every team is always looking to take a chance and swing and miss on the next talented guy. I think, does that value match with the 49ers in a structure where the 49ers look at what they're recouping as a reasonable enough asset, given everything they gave up for Trey Lance, and they look at it as more valuable than a quarterback, given all the history of injuries they've had at quarterback, versus what a team will be offering for Trey Lance. I mean, you and I went back and forth about this conversation a lot earlier in the offseason. I remember I told you I was quite skeptical on what teams would offer for Trey Lance just because the sample size is so low. He's such an enigma. It's very difficult. And I remember you bringing up picks like the 11th overall pick, Larry, the 35th overall pick, stuff like that. And I was like, I don't see how that happens because he is such a prospect. And I think that's kind of where we are with this trade market, Larry. And here's my thing. I'm not sure if preseason is enough of a sample size to change that. That's my problem.
I mean, here's my question though, Vish. If he plays well and the other quarterbacks all play well, then what? Then other teams may like him, but would Trey playing well give the 49ers a belief in him as well and make him more viable? Or have they already decided that, the direction they want to go and it's all just about, just upping his trade value? Have they already decided that they're trading him whenever anybody offers anything? Or if he played well enough for other teams to have interest, would the 49ers be like, well, wait a second, he's playing well, let's keep him here? That's the part where it's like we need some answers on this. We don't really have any clarification on what exactly the 49ers, how they'll react to him playing poorly. I mean, and how they will react to him playing well. I do believe there'll be a market for him in a league where there's maybe 20 good quarterbacks or 15 good quarterbacks and there's 32 jobs. If he plays well, there'll be teams that will want him and there will be teams that will come asking for him. But then will the 49ers rebuff them and decide that they want multiple number ones?
What do you think? What do you think they would do? You've been around the building. You've been there this entire offseason. What's the vibe you get?
Well, they only tell us how that they're never going to say anything that devalues the player. So like their true feelings have to be gleaned from observing their moves more than what they say. I mean, I could point to the presser where, hey, Kyle said this and he sounded positive, and John said that and he sounded positive, and I just heard Trent Williams sound real positive, and George Kittle says he looks better than ever, and everything's positive. But then why did a guy like Sam Darnold sign it before free agency? And what did they say to him to get him to come? And what did they say to Brandon Allen to be the number 4 guy?
He was a second stringer last year, right?
Yeah.
And
what did they say
he was
to
still
him?
there on the street. Let me ask you this then, because this is how I see it, and I don't know if this is a fair estimation of what is fundamentally happening, with the 49ers quarterback. I think a lot of people look at it and they always ask the question of what has changed with Trey, right? You and I started asking that question early in the offseason. And the answer to that question is always Brock. But to me, something changed with Trey independent of Brock last offseason, right? I think that's why Jimmy came back, and I think that's why Sam Darnold's here. A lot of people look at it as this is Trey versus Brock. No, I think Brock played well, and Brock established himself as a viable starting quarterback independent of their feelings of Trey Lance. To me, the reason why Trey Lance is competing with Sam Darnold is because something between the course of last offseason up to when he got hurt had them spooked, where he has not convinced them that he is a viable starter. To me, because if they looked at him as a viable starter and they had Brock, like, okay, sure, Brock's sample size allows him to be the starter. I'm not going to argue that. What I wouldn't expect is for Trey then to be competing with another guy, who they view as a highly talented prospect, and that other guy started 55 games and basically washed up on two teams that gave him the opportunity to be the franchise guy, right? Like the Jets opened it up and said, Sam Darnold, you are our savior. Now, they put a lot of shit around him, but they did open it up for him like that, and it didn't work out. He didn't play great. The situation wasn't great. Carolina traded 3 picks. They picked up his 5th-year option before he played a snap for them, which guaranteed him $18 million the subsequent year, and they opened it up for him as the starter, right? And it didn't go well the first year, and then the second year, I guess he finished the season playing okay. I don't think he played that well. He played okay. He played, competent football, but
maybe his best. He might have played
right.
His
I think
best
there's
ball.
25 different quarterbacks that would have went 4-2 with Carolina last year, the way they were running the football with Chuba Hubbard and Dante Foreman. Okay, so and that's where if they have that guy here, and it sounds like that guy is on even standings with the 3rd overall pick in the draft. Like, that doesn't add up, Larry. And to me, the answer to that is not, hey, Brock Purdy played great. No, the answer to that is the 2022 offseason for Trey Lance was not something that the 49ers wanted. It sounds like, to me, the best way I can describe what's going on is that the 2022 offseason, it spooked them. That's why Jimmy came back when he did. I continue to ask the question, if the 49ers had started 3-4, and they had the same debacle on Sunday Night Football against Denver, except it was Trey Lance running out the back of the end zone, do you think that Trey Lance would have continued and started that entire season?
No.
I don't know. 3-4, there was palpable tension after 0-1 in a monsoon against the Chicago Bears. Granted, that was the worst team in the NFL last year, but you know what I'm saying? So with Jimmy Garoppolo in the room, that's where I'm kind of skeptical about the entire outlook of Trey Lance from the 49ers. And a lot of people keep comparing it to Brock Purdy. I don't really care about where he is relative to Brock Purdy, because to me, even if Brock Purdy never emerged and let's say the 49ers season tanked with the Garoppolo injury last year, I don't think Trey Lance was going to get the same, we're going to open it up. It's going to be we're going to part the Red Sea Moses style, and you're going to be our starter again this year. I think he would have been in a competition with the Sam Darnold type, even if there was no Brock Purdy coming into this year. Heck, remember the reports and rumors that started that Jimmy Garoppolo was going to return, and how the relationship with Garoppolo was the best it's ever been, and Garoppolo was playing the best football of his career and all of that. Kawakami started speculating, and then he got hurt, and Brock Purdy showed up. But I need that conversation about Trey Lance to stop being about Brock Purdy, because there's something that's changed between their evaluation, what's gone on in the building, and how they wanted to develop him. There's something not right there. And to me, that has nothing to do with Brock Purdy emerging. Brock Purdy emerging actually is the get out of jail free card there. But I don't think that's the reason why we're here with him in a quarterback competition with Sam Darnold,
it really is interesting. I mean, and then if you go back to the Bears game, I mean, the rain came late, but there was no points in the first. The Niners only scored 10 points in that game, and I think only 3 points in the first half.
Debo did fumble at the 5-yard line, which hurt them.
Then you go back to the Houston game, and that the 49ers won 23-7. But if you go back to that game, the 49ers had 3 points at halftime in that game. So, I mean, yeah, they scored 20 in the second half. So basically, we've had Trey, and then if you go back to the Arizona game, the other game that he started, let's see the Arizona game. The 49ers scored 0 in the first half and 10 points overall in that game. So it's
Larry,
really, it may come down to, and there was no, that was his first NFL start. But once again, there's not a lot of points there. I mean, and then you're comparing that to an offense where the Niners averaged 33 points a game with Brock Purdy. So at the quarterback, and people say, well, there was CMC and this and then all the, people can play these games forever. And it's like, ultimately it comes down to points. You're an offense. You're trying to produce points. They didn't produce points in the Bear game. They didn't produce points in the first half of the Texans game. They didn't produce points. I mean, literally, I mean, no points.
All right.
So, I mean, and this is with Shanahan and still a team that has a lot of talent. So I think maybe that could be part of the on-field evaluation. And as far as the off-field thing, I don't know. I mean, how do they feel about Trey as a person? How do they feel? I mean, they say they say lots of great things about him. I don't know. I don't know how they feel about him. I don't have like an inside source that says, hey, in reality, they feel this way about him. I don't.
Right.
All I've got to go on is what they're doing, not really what they're. And I would say to anybody else, follow what Trey does. Follow what the Niners do. What Trey says doesn't mean anything. What the Niners say doesn't mean anything. You know what I'm saying? Let's get beyond what people say. People say things for reasons. There's all kinds of reasons. You're maintaining trade value. Trey's being respectful. They're being respectful. I mean, there's a lot of sayings. It's like follow their actions and follow the quarterback's actions on the field. The actions of Trey on the field, now granted, it's a small sample size, but it's only really one good half of football in the 4 starts. One good half.
I think one good half is a little bit reductionist because to me, the biggest point with it is that it also hasn't been bad, right? And I think that one thing is, Larry,
except for points.
But you were a big fan of him before the draft, right? I think there was an understanding for the people that were a big fan of him. And, there was somebody like me who was less of a fan. It was because the sample size knew that, hey, this is going to be a long development project. Now, you don't expect any rookie quarterback to come off the bat and play with the poise and confidence that Purdy played with as a 7th-round pick. But certainly there's a different development for, Trey Lance coming into the league than for Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert, just as an example. I mean, obviously those guys are also extra anomalies because they played outstanding as rookies, but just in terms of their readiness to be drop-back passers in the NFL. Now, I do want to – now I have to go adjust this point a little bit because now that I'm looking up their stats, it's a little bit eerily similar. But the point I was going to make once you brought up the games was that the last quarterback I remember that was kind of demoted down the depth chart like this 4 games into his career as a first-round pick was Paxton Lynch. And visually, and it's my memory of what happened, and I watched those games with Paxton Lynch, not – in-depthly, but I watched them. And I have, of course, in-depthly watched Trey Lance's 4 starts. But visually, I remember Paxton Lynch being legitimately terrible. And I don't ever get the feeling when I watch Trey Lance through 4 games, Larry. I'm not going to tell you it was the greatest football ever, right? There were some pretty ugly misses in those 4 games, right? The first play he ever has in the second half against Seattle, they get a little bootleg action, a little flat to Kittle. He one-hops it to him. He one-hopped the screen to Debo at the end of the half against the Bears. So there were some ugly misses. Outstanding throws too, right? Like the layered ball to Ray McLeod, the throw to Tyler Kroft on 3rd and 14 in the second half against the Bears. So we've got a mixed bag. But the point is I never found it to be terrible. But let me read you some stats here, Larry, okay?
Okay.
And this is a little bit incomplete because one of these quarterbacks got injured in the time he played and the other quarterback didn't. And again, this is also incomplete because now I have to go back and watch Paxton Lynch. But I was surprised by how eerily similar these stats are through 4 games in 2 years. So Trey Lance has actually participated in 8 games. Of course, he scored 2 touchdowns in games that he didn't start. But he's 56 for 102 attempts with 55% completion percentage, 797 yards in his career, 5 touchdowns, 3 picks, okay? Paxton Lynch, in those 4 games that he played, 5 games he participated in, 4 starts through 2 years. He was released, by the way, the subsequent year by the Denver Broncos. I am not making a Trey Lance Paxton Lynch comparison here, by the way. It's just crazy how similar the stats are. But Paxton Lynch was 79 for 128, 61.7% completion percentage, 792 yards, 4 touchdowns, 4 interceptions.
Right.
We're talking about the same numbers here, basically, through 4 games, right? And my perception of the situation, and this is why I want to go back and watch it, because I remember Paxton Lynch being legitimately terrible. And those numbers aren't that bad, right? They're not indicative, of a quarterback that was drafted in the first round and given up on in 4 games, right? And I have, in a lot of ways, similar feelings towards Trey Lance, even though I was never a big proponent of this entire thing, because I think he still has a large amount of potential that's untapped because it's only 4 games into his career. I'm blown away now that these 2 examples, the numbers are this similar. That was a lot of incomplete thoughts from me, Krug. What are your conclusions from that? Because I honestly am now trying to figure out how to think of it, because I didn't look up the stats until 2 minutes ago. And the stats are shockingly similar here. And I do not view them as similar players or even Trey Lance anywhere near that track of being a bust the way Paxton Lynch was.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that if you look at the last decade of NFL quarterbacks drafted in the first round, you're going to find that it's way, way more risky to draft these guys in the first round than we make it seem. We make it seem like it's a slam dunk, and it ain't. It's not a slam dunk. And for every Josh Allen and for every Patrick Mahomes, there's 3 EJ Manuels and 4 Johnny Manziels and 5 Blake Bortles. You know what I mean? It's like it's a failure-ridden deal. So I just think that, I mean, it's even guys who have made it, there's a lot of guys, Teddy Bridgewater was a first-round pick. He made it in the league, but he hasn't really made it as an NFL. I guess he's made some money, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's a failure-ridden thing. So, I guess we should just all kind of realize that, when you take a first-round quarterback, there's a miss rate. There's a swing and miss rate. Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota. I mean, none of these guys are awesome. There's a lot of misses there. So it's not like, oh my God, people are like Kyle Shanahan and what should happen to Kyle Shanahan. It's like, I mean, I think it's safe to say that we have to kind of put our arms around at least the possibility that, you know what, they may have swung and missed. They took a gamble on a really inexperienced quarterback who's arguably, or actually not arguably, he is, when you look at total passes thrown, the most inexperienced NFL quarterback that went in the first round in the last 40 years.
And do you know what the average number of attempts for a Hall of Fame quarterback in college was?
No.
So I did this research last year. Unfortunately, it was on my old computer, the full document. But if I remember correctly off the top of my head, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But that number is somewhere between 800 to 1,200 pass attempts. I think the average Hall of Famer might be 1,200 pass attempts in college. That was their average number of throws. And then the average MVP quarterback. And that number is a little bit skewed because Cam Newton won an MVP. And he only had 1 season of, I think, 300-something throws at Auburn, 330. But, of course, he had the 2 seasons of junior college as well. So that does exist. Although, Larry, I will say it's tough to look at a situation when there seems to be so many moving parts and there seems to be so much movement towards moving a quarterback after 4 starts when, guys, like, let me describe it like this. Josh Rosen started more games for the Arizona Cardinals than Trey Lance has started for the San Francisco 49ers. And Josh Rosen was in Arizona for a year.
Wow. I mean, Here's the question too. The Niners also, I mean, do they not, if they've made this concrete evaluation, yeah, okay, it's one thing to say Brock Purdy's our guy. Okay, that's fine. But you took a long-term gamble on a quarterback that was really inexperienced. If you don't, so if you want to say he's not ready yet, okay, that's okay. But if you're gonna say he's never going to be ready, man, I mean, you're gonna get to that conclusion after 4 starts
Right.
and barely ever playing him? I mean, that's the dramatic part of it that kind of makes me go, well, wait a second. And then why is he not? Why not just if you really don't believe, why don't you just release him? I mean, if you really don't believe that he's good enough to be number 2, then why would you just keep him? Is it because you don't want to look bad potentially? I don't know what their mindset is at this point. But I will say this as I'm jotting down just the quarterbacks that have gone in the first round. And I'm, 4 or 5 drafts into this thing. And I just wanted to take a look in the last decade. And guess what I'm finding is like there's Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, and Josh Allen. But listen to the other group. E.J. Manuel, Johnny Manziel, Blake Bortles, Teddy Bridgewater, Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, Josh Rosen, Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Mitchell Trubisky, Paxton Lynch, Carson Wentz, Jared Goff. And so I'm just saying there's some okay guys there. And Goff, I guess Wentz was okay at one point. Baker Mayfield's shown some things. There's a lot of swing and miss there. So maybe our expectation was that this was less risky than it actually was.
No, I don't think it's that, Larry. I don't think it's that. Because I think the problem I have with the discourse surrounding the situation, and this is where I really defend Trey Lance, is because Trey Lance has been who we thought he was going to be, right? Like Trey Lance was promised to be this young, inquisitive, vibrant, smart, eloquent person with ridiculous amount of physical gifts, the amount of mental capacity to match these gifts, and the rawest skill set in terms of actually playing in games that we had seen. Now, that raw skill set was combined with subtly advanced things that he did in the limited sample size we got, but it was very limited in terms of sample size. And before I go on, do you think he's been anything besides that? Like, do you think there was a part of him that was advertised before the draft that you're like, damn, like he was supposed to be smart and now I don't think he's smart, or he was supposed to be really professional and look at him.
Well, I can't speak to the character other than because I don't really know the person.
Just speak to what you've seen as someone who covers the team in such a close proximity.
Yeah, I would say that, the one thing it's hard, I've been told forever that if you're not accurate, it's hard to change that. And I see a guy who, I also see a guy who, like, I see good arm strength, but I don't see Flacco. I see good athleticism, but I don't see, the kind of mobility that makes me go, oh, he's a burner. He's not a burner. He ran for 1,100 yards, but he ran like over people at a lower level. He's not a runner for a quarterback as like an NFL quarterback. I mean, he's not running away from anybody at the NFL level, so I guess, I see a little bit of like, okay, so he's not a speedy runner. He's more of a powerful runner. So he's not, so what is he as a runner? He's not a running back. He's more almost like a fullback. And then as a thrower, I see a stronger than average arm, but I don't see any real consistent timing, touch, and accuracy.
Did you see those things in college? So do you feel like there's a distinction from what you saw in college?
I saw good numbers.
That's my point. That's my point, right? Like, I don't think he's a different player than what he was in college. And the 49ers knew that, and they drafted him. And now they're complaining about issues that already existed. So then when I come to the draft pick, and this is where I defend Trey Lance, it's hard for me to blame Trey Lance for being who Trey Lance is. If you were going to draft him, there was a certain plan. There was a certain thing that you had to embrace, knowing that you were taking the rawest quarterback in NFL history. The rawest quarterback in NFL history. He threw the ball less times from his freshman year in high school than Trevor Lawrence did in 1.5 years at Clemson. And Trevor Lawrence threw it more 4 years in high school and all of that. So they took the rawest quarterback in NFL history. And then you want to blame the quarterback. I cannot get myself, even though I was skeptical of the situation prior to the situation, I can't, and this is why I constantly defend Trey Lance. I can't get myself to blame the player in this situation when the player is exactly who we thought, quote Denny Green, he is who we thought he was. And we let him off the hook.
Well, I mean, you can't, to me, you can't blame the player for not being what you thought he was going to be. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like it wasn't like he sold himself as, the second coming. He just said, here I am, and let people evaluate. And they evaluated on their own. But the hardest thing to do is to evaluate the quarterback. And there's just lots of, and just looking at the last decade of quarterbacks in the NFL, there's far more misses than there are hits, even in the first round of the draft. So it just what does that tell you? It tells me that it's just a really hard position to evaluate. Mm-hmm. And there's been a handful of good ones, but there's been twice as many bad ones. I mean, the good ones are Josh Allen, Watson, Mahomes, Lamar, Burrow, Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, and the bad ones are I mean, there's some undecideds, like is Fields, Tua. What's Fields, what's Tua, what's Zach Wilson, what's Jordan Love, Daniel Jones. But I mean,
even Trey Lance is still an unknown there.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys who are just like, you know what? They were first round picks, but it just didn't happen. So I just think it's a really hard evaluation. We make it seem like it's easy. Everybody knows a good quarterback when they see one, but it's like they don't know how he's going to project from college to the pros. And then
but
the 1 year starters are even riskier. No, I'm just saying the 1 year starters are even riskier. And then the FCS quarterbacks who are 1 year starters probably is like the risky of the risky.
Right. But you knew all of these risks, and then you traded 3 first round picks on top of it and went and took the quarterback. And that's where it's hard for me to look at this situation and be like, damn, the quarterback failed. Because he didn't really fail. It's just the team expected something else. And I don't think that that's what really happened. And that's where I would say my biggest adaptation as we continue to talk about this. And I would say my thoughts are constantly evolving as we get new information. And as I reason out some things differently, sometimes my thoughts, I guess, make sense. And sometimes they're ridiculous. But hopefully I keep evolving them to the point where they make sense. Is that, Brock Purdy kind of saved their bacon on where the quarterback situation is today. Because I think coming into this year would have been a bigger mess had he not played like that for those 8 games. I really do, Larry. Because if I evaluate Trey Lance independent of what happened to Brock Purdy, and I think that's the most important thing I wanted to do in this show, Brock Purdy has nothing to do with Trey Lance and Sam Darnold's competition. That didn't happen because Brock Purdy played well. That happened because they are not sure about Trey Lance going into year 3, the guy they spent everything on to take number 3 overall. Is that fair, right? That's a fair way to describe it. Yeah.
I mean, it really, it's not a Brock Purdy, Trey Lance deal. It's young quarterback prospects, who's ready to play right now and who needs more time. And it sounds like we have 3 different tiers. We have Brock Purdy ready to play right now and succeed. Then we have guys like Darnold and Allen who are ready to play right now, but to what level? And then we have another level where it's like we have Trey Lance who is not ready to play right now, according to sounds like everybody around the Niners. That's what that's what I'm getting out of that.
This is to you from Miguel Ruiz. He says, Larry, it's okay for us Niners fans to be critical of our team. They swung and missed. Kyle was pissed at Jimmy. He made an irrational move / decision moving up to 3 to get a quarterback that he wasn't going to develop.
And you know what? When they made the selection, I said it that day. I said, to some degree, Kyle Shanahan is calling his own bluff, because Kyle has never really, he's not Holmgren. Holmgren when he went to Green Bay had already developed Steve Young, had already helped develop Joe Montana. And then he goes to Green Bay and they trade for Brett Favre, and he develops Brett Favre from the wild gunslinger that he was at Southern Miss into a slightly less wild guy who operated the West Coast system, and the combination became Hall of Fame. But Shanahan's a great offensive mind, great play caller, sequencer, great, run game, but he doesn't have a track record of taking young quarterbacks. It's not like he's considered a quarterback guru who's been able to take multiple young quarterbacks from A to B to C to D and have them have a tremendous career.
Can I interrupt that?
RG3.
I think he hasn't taken heralded young quarterbacks and done that for them. But I mean, the career that Nick Mullins had, how many other coaches do you think he's going to have that career with that skill set? Like Matt Schaub, he made Matt Schaub a good player. And Matt Schaub was a real nice thrower, but that's really all Matt Schaub had. He had size and he threw the ball very, very well. Those were the two things he had, right? He did, and Brian Hoyer, what he did with him in Cleveland, I don't want to sound like I'm defending Shanahan against the point you made, because the point you made is relevant and it's a fact on his career. But I will say, when we're describing him and his work with quarterbacks, we say that he doesn't have this reputation with young quarterbacks based solely on the fact that what happened with the heralded young quarterbacks he worked with, right? But what he did for Nick Mullins' career, I mean, Larry, Nick Mullins doesn't have an NFL quarterback skill set. He started 15, 20 games. He
supports the quarterback with an offense that works. I'm not saying he doesn't do anything to help quarterbacks. I'm just saying that when you have a super raw quarterback that you need to build them up from the ground up, and they don't have I mean, Trey Lance, from the guys that I've talked to who watched him, was so inexperienced that he didn't even have any bad habits. He didn't have any real habits. He was just, he doesn't even have enough reps to have developed bad habits. He just lacks reps. Right. But they just got him into a situation where they didn't have the ability to give him any reps. And now he's sitting there multiple years, hasn't had any reps. But it's like, what comes first? It's like, hey, I want to get a job. You need experience. But I got to get a job to get experience. Yeah, but you got to have experience to get a job. It's that catch-22. It's like, Trey's got to have reps to get better, but he's got to be at a certain level to get those reps. And how's he ever going to get the reps? Trey Lance is a screaming example of that the NFL needs a minor league system. They don't have one. If they had a minor league system, they could have sent him to the minors, let him play through it, let him develop reps, let him, develop a style, let him, show what he had. I mean, he probably should have stayed in college and worked on his craft in college without the pressure of winning, like you have at the NFL level.
But it's hard to say stay in college when there's a team willing to trade 2 first-round picks and swap a third one and go from 12 to 3 to take you, right? Like, if there's a team willing to do that, it's hard to say, hey, kid, go back to college. And that's where, again, it's hard for me to blame you, Trey Lance, for not being developed, because you never told us, you never lied to us and said, hey, I actually threw the ball 2,300 times in college. Pro Football Reference or College Football Reference just didn't track it. Like, the Niners had all of this information available, and they still took the risk. Now, don't complain to me about, hey, look at his sample size. Like, it's not, what are we supposed to do where he needs experience, but we're not sure we can go through the growing pains that giving him experience requires? That's a cop-out for a misevaluation that you made. That's a misevaluation you made. You didn't evaluate. There's 3 things they misevaluated. They misevaluated where Trey Lance was. And I think part of that has to do with, do you remember right after the draft, Schefter kept saying that they viewed Trey Lance as the most ready to start day one. And part of it was because of how he did on those aptitude tests. So they felt he was the most ready to absorb the 49ers playbook day one. I think there's a lot of reality to that. I think when Beer says they gave him chances, I think the Niners feel like they gave him chances to take the job as a rookie. The first chance was when he got opportunities in preseason against the Chargers. If you remember the Chargers preseason game, I keep reminding people, it was supposed to be Jimmy with the starters, then Trey with the starters, then Jimmy came back in. And Jimmy on that first drive threw an interception off of Brandon Ayuk's hands on 3rd and 15. Trey Lance came into the game. The offense sputtered with the first-team offense. Jimmy ended up never coming back. And I remember Chris Sims right after that game said that was Trey Lance's opportunity to take the starting quarterback job, and he thinks he blew it. By the way, Trey Lance went on against the second team in that game to have a very nice 2-minute drill to set up a field goal to end the half, and then he threw that beautiful through route where he held the Mike linebacker with his eyes and threw an absolute ball to Travis Benjamin. So he did play well in that game, but that game was followed by the 2-quarterback system against the Raiders and all of that. Then Shanahan said there was a point in the season when he played that they thought he was going to start that monsoon Sunday night game against the Colts because Jimmy got hurt, and I guess they thought he played decently against Arizona, and he got hurt. He had the knee sprain against Arizona. So that was another breaking point where, hey, you could have become the guy and you got hurt. And then finally they opened up the red carpet. So I'm not saying they have given him opportunities. I'm just saying that I think that that's the lens that they're viewing it. And I would say that their view of it is unfair because they're making the player seem like he was promised to be something and he didn't end up being that. When I'm trying to tell you the reason I continue to defend the player is because I think the player has always been exactly who we thought he was. And the team wasn't able to follow through on turning him from that to what they thought he could be when they drafted him. By the way, what do you think about this? Because Evoke says he's pragmatic and he would follow the Parcells rules of a quarterback. And just for a reminder for people, I think that's
40 plus
3 years starter in college, senior, graduate. I think it's 2 years of team captain, start 30 games. Oh, right here. Win 23 games, post 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, completed at least 60% of passes thrown. Now, I think it's a little bit antiquated because we have so many underclassmen coming out, Larry, where it's hard to see these guys actually play that much. I remember in 2016 when we were talking about the Parcells best fit for quarterbacks with Trent Baalke, at the time Connor Cook was the only one in that draft class that fit the requirements. You remember Carson Wentz would have been the other one, but Carson Wentz was hurt a lot at NDSU. So he only threw the ball, I think, 602 times at NDSU. So Connor Cook was the only one who fit the criteria. Jacoby Brissett was another Parcells favorite. Nice player. I don't know if that's realistic in today's NFL, though Brock Purdy does, off the top of my head, check a lot of those Parcells boxes. Do you think it's still very much applicable, or are you like me where you think it's a little bit antiquated in terms of how we're looking at the quarterback?
Well, I mean, I do believe that it's based on sound reasoning. I'll say that. And I, experience is something that you definitely need. I think it's very risky to take a 1-year starter, no matter how good that 1 year was. And we have lots of examples of that. Mitchell Trubisky being one of them.
Right.
And I just think that the combination of FCS quarterback and 1-year starter, and it's like maybe then the 30 for 30 on this is going to be good. Did the Niners really trade up for Mac Jones? Is it possible that really what they really wanted was just a quarterback that was on a rookie deal, and that Mac Jones would have been Kyle's choice because he was a ready to play quarterback on a rookie deal? Maybe that was the case. Maybe they traded up with him in mind. Maybe the public pressure to go with the higher end athlete may have impacted their thinking. It's possible that Kyle got over.
Give you a completely different angle on this.
It's also possible Kyle got overruled by Jed and other people in the room. I mean, Kyle is an employee.
Definitely.
Maybe right. Jed said, "Hey, I mean, I don't know that that's the case,
And the number
could
one
have
goal
happened.
of the organization is to make money. It's not to win. That's every NFL organization's goal. So
One
they
other
will make
super,
business decisions.
before you get to your point, let me just read this one super from
Go ahead.
Flav, who
Sure,
was
sure,
donated
sure.
on my
fault.
channel. He says,
Yeah,
he says,
by the way, I don't know why your comments are not showing up. We have to get that fixed so that
I
we
know,
can get all of
but
these.
Flav says Trey was the beneficiary of COVID, 1 year of college, no sub, versus subpar talent, subpar caliber talent, no combine to put his athleticism under the microscope, made him extremely hard to scout. Niners bet on the mystery box and lost.
Yeah, I think that is a way to put it, though I do think some of those descriptions of his play in college were harsh because he did play exceptionally well at the FCS level, regardless of how you want to put it. He played well. He played very well.
I mean, I'll take some partial responsibility for this as well. I mean, I definitely was, pushing hard on the Trey Lance front, leading into that draft because I really believed in his upside ability. But looking back on it, it was very much a risk. And I think it's kind of showing itself. One other one here from Artur says, Artur Gazarian says, I think the best thing for Trey would have been to be drafted during the 2017 season. And for the beginning of Shanahan's regime, the team wasn't built around Lance. Lance came in raw to a team that was already built. And that's a very good point by Artur. So
yeah, I agree with that. And by the way, those were some of the things. Again, I you know what? I'm not even going to pretend to be humble about it. I will proudly tap myself on the back. These were some of the things that I was talking about at the time that didn't make sense to me when we were talking about, well, the team is already there. They're already built. And if you remember, they brought back part of the reason the 2021 offseason became complicated for them is even though they went 6-10, COVID allowed them to bring back DJ Jones, who they didn't think was coming back on a 1-year deal. K'Wan Williams came back on a 1-year deal. Jaquaski Tart came back on a 1-year deal. So they ended up bringing back a bunch of veterans. And instead of doing a semi-turnover of the roster there, they ended up having another veteran team, and it was like the third run back of 2019, right? They had Raheem Mostert. They had all of that still. And it put them in kind of a weird situation where they didn't have a timeline to let the quarterback grow with the team, right? Like McDermott took over for Buffalo in 2017. And a lot of people forget that they made the playoffs that year with Tyrod Taylor on the back of Shady McCoy and running the football. And the subsequent year, they were actually worse before making the playoffs in Josh Allen's second year. In the subsequent year, they actually kind of turned over the roster. They won and made the playoffs in 2017 with Rex Ryan's team. And then they turned over this roster and they had Josh Allen grow with this young team, right? They drafted Tremaine Edmonds. Matt Milano was a young player. Trey White was the first pick they made as a regime after the Patrick Mahomes trade down. They signed Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde from Green Bay, like a 25-year-old safety. So they had young players growing. I think that's absolutely right. Here's a new angle on this entire situation, because I think the number one mistake when we look at this quarterback situation, though, in a lot of ways you can ask how much of a mistake is it really when we're talking about a team that's been to back-to-back NFC Championships games. But here's the number one thing I think that this team missed out on is that if they were going to replace Jimmy Garoppolo, Krug, to me, they needed a quarterback who was going to walk in the door and convince everybody he's better than Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think that's something they missed out in all of this. I don't think they understood how attached the team was to Jimmy, how difficult it would be to replace Jimmy. And when you say you're replacing Jimmy, you have to show the other guy, right? Like, this is why I talked about Matthew Stafford. And by the way, go see these. These were shows with me and Grant. Talked about all these things then itself in 2021. When Matthew Stafford walks in and throws the ball, as much as Deebo Samuel loves Jimmy Garoppolo, as much as George Kittle loves Jimmy Garoppolo, who do you think they're going to think is going to help their business more? I mean, Stafford, we're talking about one of the great throwers in NFL history, right? Like, we're just talking about a better player than Jimmy Garoppolo. When Trey Lance comes in and he's more talented than Jimmy, but he's not as consistent, and it's like, well, Jimmy is still like a veteran and all of that, and this guy is this young, amazing talent, but we're not sure that he's better than him right now. I think it creates quarterback controversy. It becomes difficult for Trey Lance to become the guy and truly take over the team because the other guy is still lingering. They allowed the guy to linger. I think one of the biggest mistakes, and we haven't talked about this with this quarterback dilemma, is that if they were going to replace Jimmy Garoppolo, they had to get an upgrade. And they didn't get a guy, some people view Trey Lance as an upgrade. Some people don't view Trey Lance as an upgrade. I'm not going to get into that. But they didn't get a guy who could convince their team that he's an upgrade. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Well, no, I think what you really mean to say, Vish, is that if you're going to move off of a veteran quarterback in his prime like Jimmy Garoppolo, you need a guy who walks in who's an instant upgrade.
Right.
Trey Lance may be an upgrade eventually, but if you're going to win over the room, you can't say, hey, this guy is going to be a lesser player for 3 years, but eventually, guys, he's going to be an upgrade. They don't have this isn't guaranteed contracts. Nobody's guaranteed anything. You need either an instant upgrade or an instant skill set that is to the naked eye better.
Right. The one that'll make you forget about the other guy, right? Like Alex Smith was good. He was in the MVP conversation. But when game 1 against the Chargers team that ended up going 12-4 that year, when young Patty Mahomes comes out and throws 5 touchdowns, 300 yards, what do you think Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce are thinking? I'm sure they loved Alex Smith, but they're like, ooh, we're going to get paid. And
but, it is interesting because this organization's gone through 2 of these now because there were some players that weren't necessarily all that excited about Kaepernick being given the starting job over Alex Smith.
To me, there is a difference, though, on how the head coach handled both of those situations. Harbaugh took an upfront approach where he said, I'm the effing guy, and you're going to listen to who I tell you is playing. And he didn't play games. He got behind Kaepernick, and he said, everybody's getting behind Kaepernick. If you're not behind Kaepernick, sorry, right? It was to the point where they disrespected Alex Smith and didn't even give him a podium in the Super Bowl, right? The guy was, I think, 8-2 as a starter that year. You almost, he came the last game Alex Smith started in that year before the Rams game, he got hurt. He was 18 for 19 on Monday Night Football with 3 touchdowns, 2 of which to Michael Crabtree against the Arizona Cardinals. By the way, both of those Michael Crabtree touchdowns were on Patrick Peterson in his prime. Michael Crabtree always owned Patrick Peterson, never understood the matchup. One of the weirdest phenomenons I've ever seen. That always happened. I loved Michael Crabtree. You know that from last show. I had to give my man a shout out there. So Alex Smith was coming off playing some good ball, and Harbaugh didn't play games with him. Kyle waffled, right? Before the draft, he said, we're going to trade up for a starting quarterback. That's why we made all of this moves. And immediately after the draft, he said, well, Jimmy Garoppolo is, a really good player, and it's tough for guys to beat out Jimmy Garoppolo. He's a veteran quarterback. And then he played this kind of, I'm into this guy because of how much we traded in, but I'm not going to disrespect Jimmy game, where he kind of played this 50-50 hedge game, didn't feature either of them in the state of the franchise. I will continue to contest that it's weird that you don't feature the guy you just traded 3 first-round picks to acquire, and he's a quarterback, the most marketable player on your team. You don't feature him in your state of the franchise. I think that's weird. They didn't do that, and they played kind of this halfway in, halfway out thing. And I think that is the distinction when you're talking about these two situations, is that Harbaugh took all his chips and plunged with Colin Kaepernick, right? He didn't do this thing where he was going to let people decide and let it play out organically. He made his decision and he plunged. And he was trying to make that decision earlier in the year, if you remember, when they got embarrassed at home by the Giants and Kaepernick came in to throw the ball down the field at the end of the half. And that was kind of an early indictment that they were a little bit unhappy with Alex Smith. Of course, the second indictment after the fact that they spent the entire offseason flirting with Peyton Manning. Alex Smith even took a visit to Miami, if you remember, that offseason before they ultimately signed him. So, yeah, there was some more stuff there. But Harbaugh plunged, and Shanahan never fully plunged, even though technically he was already plunged before he could ever decide whether to plunge or not when he made the investment to go to 3.
Yeah. I mean, they made a sizable investment. They traded up to 3. Who do they really love? I don't know. I mean, maybe they felt like the Jets were going to pass on Zach Wilson, and maybe Zach Wilson was their guy. Maybe Trey was their guy. Maybe Mac Jones was their guy. We're never really, I don't think, ever going to get the true answer to that until Kyle and John are retired, and we may never get the answer. We may get the answer if they win championships and then retire and feel secure enough in their position to reveal that. But we may never get the answer to that. The question is now, okay, so you have Purdy, who's your starter, and you've got Lance, who you don't believe in, according to Albert Breer, enough to put him out there. But if Lance plays well, are you going? I mean, the Niners have not said any, they've not devalued him by what they've said, but you could make an argument they've devalued him by bringing in Darnold to begin with. So are they trying to, do it all, go with Brock, cover themselves at the backup spots with Darnold and Allen, and then spot Trey in the preseason, hope that he plays really well around all this talent and in this system, and then trade him right at the cut down to a team that maybe loses a quarterback, or they could be trying that. But
I think they're too scared to trade him.
You think that? Well, but I mean, what's scarier, trading him and having him emerge, or eventually he's going to be? What's greater, their fear of trading him, or their inability to pay big dollars to keep him on the bench in a third quarterback role?
So I will say I think their fear of the public backlash for moving off of the quarterback is far greater than their ability to cut the check, right? We're talking about a team that was willingly cutting the check for two different coaches, and they fired him simply because their fans were unhappy, right? That was the biggest reason why Tom Sula was gone after 1 year, and then Chip Kelly was gone as well. Sure, they both didn't do their job competently, but if fans were behind them the way they were behind Shanahan in 2017, both of those guys probably get another year, right? Is that fair to say?
Probably. I mean, is that why they're so hell bent on winning the Super Bowl? Because
no.
Like...
I'm just saying that I think that because of that, I don't think that they would mind, because the quarterback room is relatively cheap, right? They were willing to cut the check for Garoppolo last year. I don't think cutting the check is the issue. I think they're scared to trade him, but I don't think they're scared to trade him, Krug. I'm not describing this well because I literally just repeated what I said, and then I said I don't think in front of it. What an oxymoronic statement. What I mean to say is I think they're scared to trade him unless they can control it's what you described, right? If you're trading him for Danielle Hunter, they'll make that trade tomorrow. But if you're trading him and it's like, well, we'll get rid of him for a 6th round pick, or we'll get rid of him for a 3rd round pick, or we'll get rid of him for a 4th round pick, or a 4th and a 6th, which is what Sam Darnold went for, 4th, 6th, and a 2 the year after, I don't think they'll make that move because I think they're scared. I think they're scared to make a move like that. Because, look, at the end of the day, the investment was so large. A 3rd round pick is not enough to recoup and say, well, even if we missed on it, look, we got a 3rd round pick back for it. So
well, we said that they weren't tied together, the quarterbacks, Vish, but are they? Because, like, if they win a Super Bowl with Brock, is it a wash that they may have traded up for a quarterback that,
right? Well, everything becomes a wash at that point, right? Everything.
It's a wash.
Right.
So if Brock wins a Super Bowl and Trey doesn't fulfill his potential, they go forward like nothing happened.
Does anybody care that the Rams did the Todd Gurley and Jared Goff contracts so badly that they had $30 million+ of dead cap the year they won the Super Bowl just related to those 2 contracts? Like, the 2 highest paid players on their team in terms of cap hits were guys that didn't play a snap for them to win the Super Bowl. And we don't care about how badly they mismanaged those contracts because they ultimately got the job done. Similarly, I think it would apply to the 49ers. But as long as they don't get the job done, Larry, and I think that's the problem, because they came so close with Jimmy, and the quarterback move told us that you're telling us that you can't do this with Jimmy, you need somebody else to get over the top. If they don't get over the top with Brock, even if it's for different reasons where it's like, hey, Brock's actually playing really well. Brock's not the reason why they didn't win the Super Bowl. Their roster maybe wasn't as good, or somebody else messed up. It's not like a Jimmy situation where we're pointing as the cause and effect for the 49ers not winning the Super Bowl is just that Jimmy Garoppolo is a hair worse than the kind of quarterback you feel like you need to win a Super Bowl. I think that this criticism on what happened with the pick will always remain. And I think it's a difficult criticism too, because we're talking about 1 out of 32 at the end of the day, right? Like, it's not like your chances, like this idea that developing Trey Lance is automatically increases your chances. It increases your chances substantially in some ways, but I think that 1 out of 32 is not really even 1 out of 32 when you have Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, especially the fact that they play at Arrowhead every offseason. They have the 1 seed every offseason and all of that. So, man.
In a weird way, I feel like the presence of Darnold and Allen is telling us that Trey that they either don't want him to play or don't trust him to play. So then it's a matter of, okay, how long are they going to keep Trey on their 53-man roster if he's not the starter and they're bringing in veteran backups? They're not going with 4 quarterbacks. I guess the question is this: when does this whole thing come to a head? At what point do they have to say, you know what? I'm putting my cards face up, and now you can see my cards. Are we ever going to see them flip their cards? Or is it going to be one of these things that it's just situational? Because personally, I'm kind of wondering, it's like, are we going, do you see what I'm saying? How long are they going to stay with Trey? How long can they stay with Trey and not put him in there as the starter?
I think that, yeah. That's a completely different conversation, right?
Can he ride the bench the whole year?
As long as they're winning, can't he?
I would think yes, but there's an awful. I mean, Brock Purdy there's a lot of people that are pushing for Trey Lance, and Brock has never lost a game that he started and finished. What if he goes on a 3-game losing streak? Then what? Yeah. Everybody and their brother is going to come running out of play Trey.
The week 1 game, Larry. I think week 1 Pittsburgh is just a bad place for any quarterback that starts for the 49ers. I think that all of them are going to have a tough time, right? You and I
a ready-made excuse, you're saying,
right? To me, it's like a ready-made game where we saw Burrow struggle with them last year. It's a tough defense to play week 1. They're very exotic, and you don't have that many reps on offense where everybody's in sync. You're going to have protection busts. You're going to have run game assignment busts. You're just going to have details not being exactly there. And you're talking about a defense that plays on multiple fronts. They're very aggressive. They pressure. They're going to be a home underdog. It's a tough place to open your season cross-country, right? It's a bad game for the 49ers offense. Historically, Shanahan offenses have averaged under 20 points in his entire career as a play caller week 1. It's a bad matchup across the board. What if that game looks a little bit ugly and, hey, Brock Purdy wears some of the rust that you would think is normal for a guy, returning from a serious injury? Sure. These are, $1 million questions on what could happen during the season. And I think that they should, if whoever starts week 1, that guy should have a long leash. To me, stability is more important than differentiating between these 3 quarterbacks.
It's going to be interesting because now and then you've got Kirk Cousins looming. If everybody falls on their face, which I think is the only way he would be here, everybody would have to fail. Brock, Darnold, Trey, Allen. If they all fail, I guess that Kyle could pivot to Kirk Cousins next year. I don't expect that to happen.
Can I ask you this, though? We're already talking about the next pivot, right? And look, I'm going to be very careful with how I word this because I'm not advocating for the 49ers to move off Shanahan in any capacity. I'm one of the biggest fans of Shanahan. I think he's brilliant. But I think that what Shanahan's accomplishments over the last 7 years have bought him is the last 7 years. I want to make that very clear, right? Like this idea that because he went to back-to-back NFC championship games, he should be the coach of the 49ers for the next 15 years. I don't look at it like that. Like for a head coach to make it 7 years, it's a product of the fact that he has had productive results on the field for the past 7 years, right? Because we're talking about a high volatility job, right? We're talking about 5-6 guys out of 32 that get turned over every year. I'm assuming the average life is going to be 1 to 2 years for a head coach. So 7 years is a long ass time for him to be with one franchise, and he's deserved that. He has given a large quarterback contract to Jimmy Garoppolo, and he had the opportunity to then make a second big move for a quarterback. let's envision, let's project that whatever happens, it doesn't go right at quarterback for this year. And we're saying Kirk Cousins is the subsequent move in the worst case scenario for the 49ers at quarterback. There's going to be a lot of money given to Kirk Cousins in that situation in the offseason. Do you think he deserves another chance to make his third large investment in a quarterback? I would venture to say yes. I think it's a real question that we can have a conversation about. What do you think?
You got to remember who came before him. I mean, and what's happened here. I mean, he's got a very good record. And they've been to 3 out of 4 NFC Championship games. Since 2019, Shanahan is 42-24. That means he's winning close to 64% of his games. He's got 6 playoff wins, and he's got a Super Bowl appearance. That's just since 2019. That's
right.
That's, those are good numbers. Those are not the numbers of a coach that you say goodbye to. And then what came before him? Chip Kelly and Jim Tom Sula and a whole lot of misery.
Right.
And before that,
but they got fired. My point is that they got fired after a year for their incompetence, right? And Kyle has had 7 years with this franchise because he's been fantastic, right? I'm not disagreeing that he has not been fantastic, but a lot of quarterbacks don't see 3 different large investments through in one tenure with one franchise into 3 different quarterbacks. Do you understand where I'm coming from there? Like how many coaches do you know that have had 3 different opportunities to make a large investment at the quarterback position, right? Frank Reich got 2. He got the chance with old Philip Rivers, and they gave him 1 more. And the moment Carson Wentz didn't work, they let him go, right? Doug Peterson, when Carson Wentz didn't work, they got him out of here, and he won a Super Bowl. So I'm not. Again, I want to be very careful because I'm not at all advocating moving off of Shanahan in any capacity. I think he's an awesome coach. But if we're going to talk about having the opportunity to make a third large investment in a quarterback, that's where I think this conversation becomes a little more interesting because not a lot of coaches get that opportunity. You know what I mean?
You know what it really comes down to, I think, Vish, is the truth, the truth behind Lance. Because the guy who's going to make the decision, the owner, was in the room for the decision-making process. If everybody in the room wanted Justin Fields or Mac Jones,
right,
and Shanahan's like, no, we're going Lance, then maybe he wears this one. Maybe he gets held accountable.
Okay.
But what if he was like, hey, I want Mac Jones. I love Fields. And people said, no. We need this guy. We need this guy. And he acquiesced to somebody else's belief, somebody else's wishes, and Jed was there, witnessed the whole thing. Then he may be held in higher regard after this failure because he was a team player and didn't sell out his scouting staff or whoever pushed for the quarterback, and was very mature about it the whole way through. So we'd have to know kind of who pushed for who and who wanted who. There's a truth behind these picks that only the people now granted, they all stand shoulder to shoulder with all these selections publicly, but in reality, John's in the room, Jed's in the room, and Kyle's in the room, and they all know who argued for whom. So I think that's
a great point. That is a great point.
Right. So there's a reality of the situation, and they know the reality. And so if it was all Kyle going against everybody else on Trey, then maybe he wears it, and maybe he loses face, and maybe Kirk Cousins is his last opportunity. But if Kyle was pushing hard for Justin Fields and Mac Jones, and the scouts said, no, you got to go with Trey, and Jed broke the tie and said, go with Trey, then you know what? He's taking one for the team.
Right, you give him one more chance because he was right. He was
right, and maybe he gets more control because you were wrong. If it was you pushing for it, or maybe the guy who pushed for the failed quarterback is the guy that gets shown the door. I mean, it's just you know what I mean. It's just there's a lot there. You know what I mean? There's a lot there. I mean, you would think as the final decision maker that Kyle made the call, but he may not have. He may have said to the guys, look, I like this guy, but I don't have a real strong conviction. What do you guys want? And maybe the room rose up and said, hey, you know what? We
Krug, don't
want
say
Trey.
that. Wait, Krug, don't say that. When we're talking about moving to number 3 from 12 to 3, you make that move because you have a strong conviction somewhere.
Well, you might have a strong wait. Well, you might be, but let me just say this. let's admit what the Niners really wanted in this quarterback. They wanted a quarterback on a rookie deal.
Kind of.
And
once they couldn't get Matthew Stafford,
and guess what? Every quarterback in that draft that was drafted was on a rookie deal.
Right.
So if they, if they decided maybe Kyle said to himself, hey, you know what? Said to the group, I love Zach Wilson and I love Trevor Lawrence and you guys love Trey Lance and we can get to 3. And let me see if I can get comfortable with Trey Lance or Justin Fields. And let's just say he, got comfortable on both guys, but still said, hey, you know what? I really don't have a strong conviction on these 2 guys. And then the room said, you know what? We want Trey Lance. And what if you said, okay. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, now he's going to be shown the door.
Yeah, no.
So you know what I mean? There's there is a truth behind these picks.
Right.
And I think how much he has to wear it or own it internally is taught. Now, externally, the fans are going to blame him because the buck stops with him. He makes the most money. It's, he was hired. He brought in Lynch. He's the top. I mean, everybody who's familiar with this organization will say it's Kyle's show. He's got the final call.
Right. Absolutely. Can I ask you this though? You're a scout, right? That's your background. In any capacity of draft evaluation, have you ever seen a team trade up a month before the draft for the right to further evaluate players? I've never heard of moving assets for a spot. You trade up for a player, right? Like the Chiefs traded up to 10
look at the timing.
Patrick Mahomes.
That's a great question, actually, Vish, because go look at the timing of their trade. Most of the trades happen in and around the draft. This one happened
March 28th.
Before the Fargo Pro Day, before Justin Fields' Pro Day.
After the first
or after the Fargo Pro Day. Yeah. After the Fargo Pro Day.
Which they didn't attend. And then they traded up, and then the next day they attended the Alabama second Pro Day, which Devontae Smith worked out at and Mac Jones threw at. I think the first and I think that was the same day as the Ohio State first Pro Day. And they didn't go to see Justin Fields,
if the draft were held today, who would you have taken?
Today, knowing what we know, looking back.
Yep.
Oh man, Kyle Pitts, Jamar Chase.
I mean, first of all, you wouldn't have traded up, maybe, but
if I traded up there, if I'm already stuck there, I'm going with one of those guys that's sticking with Jimmy because to me the best quarterback.
Jamar Chase. I mean, to me, it's Jamar Chase. But if it had to be a quarterback, probably would have been Fields.
Jones would be upset.
You'd take Mac Jones.
Yeah, and I would be upset that Mac Jones would have played well. Mac Jones would have played well, and I would have been upset that I used all of these assets to trade up for a guy whose skill set is, his skill set is not that different from the guy that they have right now, and they drafted him with the last pick in the draft.
Right. I mean, the Mac Jones. I mean, I think Mac Jones probably is smarter than Jimmy. I think Mac Jones is more accurate than Jimmy.
Better mover in the pocket.
But it doesn't mean that the team would have bought into Mac Jones.
Yeah. By the way, I think the theory of Mac Jones in this offense, I think a lot of people look at his struggles in a terrible offense. I've watched too much of the Patriots offense this offseason because I like watching these quarterbacks. I had a large investment in them before the draft, and I like seeing how their careers played out. And that offense is awful. The weapons are awful. And I do think Mac Jones, if you put him on the Niners offense, I've said this, I think his stats would look really good. And I think a lot of people would say, wow, Mac Jones is an awesome quarterback. And I think Mac Jones would be fine. But when we're talking about making that drastic of a move up and we look at what the end result is here today and where the Niners are, it's tough to feel happy if they would have taken Mac Jones then given how the limited assets it took to get Purdy. And I don't know if I like Mac Jones' skill set, but again, I like Purdy's skill set too, right? It's not like that much of a difference. And we're talking about 3 first-round picks and the number 3 overall pick. And we're talking about, the last pick in the draft. It's hard for me to go there. I would have taken a non-position player. I would have taken a non-quarterback for sure. But I think of the quarterback, I love Fields. I loved Fields before the draft. Fields, in a lot of ways, has disappointed me in terms of the player he's become and who, in terms of the player I thought he could be before the draft. But Fields would have been a crappy fit here, man. You got to throw the ball on time in this offense. It's the number one criteria. The ball's got to get out when it's supposed to get out, and it's supposed to go where it needs to go. And the number one issue with Justin Fields' game is that the ball doesn't come out on time.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, then there's no way around that. There's no question about that. I mean, Fields, it's easy to say Fields has the most potential at this point because he's had some incredible individual days. But
yeah, I mean, he carries an offense by himself. How many quarterbacks can do that?
Yeah. I mean, but then Mac Jones, if you judge him off the first year, looked like a guy who, was definitely ready to play. He didn't look as good this last year, but he had Joe Judge and Matt Patricia.
Right. Dude, you can only run dagger so many times. I promise defenses are smart enough. They understand you're running dagger.
And no receivers. He's got no receivers. I mean, the Patriot receivers have been terrible. So, I mean, that's part of the equation as well. How good are your receivers? How much do you blame a quarterback? I mean, Lamar Jackson, is a pretty good quarterback. He has no receivers.
By the way, there's a few more players that we didn't even mention that could be in that conversation, right? J.C. Horn is a terrific player in Carolina. Pat Surtain's an awesome player. He's another one that, we're talking about non-quarterback players. Would you trade 2 first-round picks for Jamar Chase now? I would. Would you trade 2 first-round picks for Micah Parsons now?
First of all, I loved Jamar Chase. Loved him. Thought he was incredible.
I was the idiot about Jamar Chase, by the way.
I was the idiot about Jefferson. I didn't necessarily see the greatness in Jefferson, but I loved Jamar Chase. So
I did 2 things with Jamar Chase that was wrong. One, I decided, preconceived in my head before I turned on Jamar Chase, because of how good Jefferson and Burrow were as rookies, that one of these 3 guys, all 3 of these guys can't be historic, right? One of these guys has to be the fraud. And so I kind of made that decision in my head about Jamar Chase. And then Jamar Chase, for me, is a great example of what happens when you look at the forest and see the trees and miss the big picture, which is the forest itself, right? I got too into the reps that he lost where, AJ Terrell got into his chest and he didn't really get clean off the line of scrimmage. Or, at times I had issues where it felt like, well, you win at the catch point, but you only have 31-inch arms, and you're explosive. But what happens if Jalen Ramsey covers you? Well, turns out, Jamar Chase is maybe the best receiver in football right now. So idiot Vish, I patted myself on the back earlier in this show. Now I got to really tell myself, yeah, well, that was stupid. But yeah, 100%. I would trade 2 first-round picks for Chase. I would trade 2 for Micah Parsons. I love Kyle Pitts. I think Kyle Pitts' issues were Mariota related. And I think he's going to be a big part of the Atlanta Falcons offense. I love Micah Parsons. I love Pat Surtain. God, so many good players. Rashawn Slater.
What if Lance has a great preseason and Atlanta falls on its face with Ritter? Maybe you can get Pitts at that point. Flav donates. He's on my channel. He says, if Kyle preferred Mac, but was outvoted somehow, wait a second, then he saved everyone a lot of money, especially by getting Purdy. He has a lifetime contract right now, especially if one of those if one of those people was Jed, I'll say.
I will say this, Krug. We're talking about something so speculative. So I would like for people out there that constantly like quoting when we preface these things with I think and we're speculating. I would like to preface this with this is pure speculation. But let's say he got outvoted. I now have way larger concerns on the entire power structure of the 49ers and how decisions are being made if Kyle Shanahan got outvoted on a quarterback decision. To me, now we're less talking about the quarterbacks and we're talking about, well, I don't think the 49ers are ever going to win a Super Bowl in the case where you have this brilliant offensive minded head coach and he can't even make his own decision on the quarterback. That's all kinds of problematic from organizational structure standpoint.
I know,
So
but I mean, if
that's
you're
the case, I'm blown. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and then it's like, well, wait a second. If you didn't really have a conviction and everybody wanted a, quarterback X and somebody besides you made the call, it's almost like you get another free bite of the apple because, hey, look, if it doesn't work out, somebody else made that call. I don't know. It's all at this point conjecture, but to me, what's going to be really interesting is just I think I've got a pretty good idea how everybody will react if Trey plays poorly, but how does everybody, where does this story go if Trey plays well and the Niners are wed to Purdy and it doesn't matter that Trey's playing well because they're wed to Purdy? I think that in some ways, gives them the easy out in that somebody will come make an attractive offer for Trey. And, but the only question is this: how long, if the Niners really believe in Brock and don't believe in Purdy and don't believe in Trey to the point where they're bringing in Darnold and Allen and putting those guys maybe in front of Trey on the depth chart, where does this go from there?
Right.
How does this resolve itself? At some point, somebody's going to have to say, you know what? We're not going to keep this many quarterbacks, or you know what? We don't actually love Trey and we're going to trade him, and we're going to trade him for, beans, pennies on the dollar. So,
hey, what if they're magic beans like in The Office? Do you remember what Dwight traded? He went into the show saying, I forgot what it was, but he was going to turn whatever stupid thing from Schrute Farms into the most valuable item at their little auction they had at the office, and he ended up taking the magic beans from Jim. Do you remember? Have you seen The Office?
Oh yeah, you kidding me? I love it.
Okay,
I love The Office. Yeah. Oh my gosh. But I mean, they're in a weird. I mean, let's be honest, they're in somewhat of an unprecedented territory at this point, because they drafted a raw quarterback. They say they believe in him long term, but you've got a cap. Now you've got a replacement. I would have thought going into this offseason that Trey and Brock would be 1-2, 2-1, any way you cut it, probably with Brock on top and Trey number 2, and that they would bring in a third quarterback like a Brandon Allen to give themselves a complete quarterback room. But I still would have had Trey as the clear number 2. But if we're now hearing that they're moved off of Trey as the clear number 2, and now it's more like Darnold as the likely number 2, and Trey's not even going to be trusted to play the first 6 weeks of the regular season, then now I need to figure out how long are the Niners going to stay with Trey on their roster without playing him and without having him be the backup. I mean, if you don't trust him to play even in a handful of games because he's so raw at this juncture, when, are you going to go to are you going to the finish line?
Because I don't think we're there yet.
If you ask Trey, he says he wants to stay. But if he, at some point, are they waiting for him to make a trade demand? Or are they waiting for him? Are they waiting for Brock to win a Super Bowl and then people won't care what they do with Trey? Are they waiting for a bid to come for Trey that's reasonable so they can say that they may? To me, the one thing that is their get out of jail free card on Trey, if by chance he's so raw that they don't believe he can play as a starter or as number 2 this year, I think that maybe if you could get a player like a Montez Sweat, and maybe you could throw in another player or picks, and you could somehow, because you got to remember this, if you're going to make a trade, it's like people know what you spent draft pick wise. So if all you get back is a pick and you get a 6th-round pick, it's going to be like, oh, he was a bust and you traded him. And then you're going to lose the trade, and you potentially lose on the back end if he plays well wherever he goes. But if you trade him for a good player who's a free agent at the end of the year, and that good player, let's say it's Montez Sweat, comes to the 49ers and adds to their rush, and they win the Super Bowl, then you can be like, yeah, we traded him to a place where he could play, and we took a piece back that helped us win the Super Bowl. And now you've got a little bit of plausible deniability on the bust factor, and you've separated yourself. You've gotten a player. You've improved your Super Bowl chances. You can look your fans in the eye and say, look, we did this because we're trying to win the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And that's why we traded him for Montez Sweat. And then you can even get or Chase Young. You could get a player that really is held in high regard, but his value in the trade market's low because he's a free agent at the end of the year. And then in reality, you're getting a very low return in a trade, but you're getting a big name guy that can help you. And you're kind of making the true value of the player, in this case, Lance going to the Commanders, very murky. It's like, well, wait, they got Montez Sweat. Yeah, but he was a free agent at the end of the year. You see what I'm saying?
Right. No, I know. And you've been on this the entire time, and I agree with you. If we're talking about trading him at this point, to me, that's the only plausible way that they will go about doing that.
Because, or with players, for players.
Because the value is so hazy. And everything they gave up. Yeah. Krug, it's been an hour and 37 minutes of quarterback talk. This was fun. I don't know if you can get more in depth than we did here. Do you have anything else that you wanted to talk about here before we go? Or
well, there's one other topic that I think is kind of interesting. The 49ers, and I just read this today. The 49ers obviously outbid Denver and a couple other teams for Coletto from Oregon State, the fullback. And if he, for whatever reason, there was an article out today saying if he does not make their roster, that he still might be able to, be a guy who's coveted at the cut down. Even if he doesn't make their roster, by a couple other teams that would like to have a smart fullback, jack of all trades guy. They may be able to, from what I'm reading today, either have Coletto make their roster, or maybe he doesn't make their roster, but they could actually trade him for a draft pick in 2024 and turn an undrafted college free agent who never played a down in the regular season, turn that into a 2024 draft pick. I just thought that was and I don't know who had the article. I think it was maybe on Pro Football Rumors. I picked it up, but that to me would be really interesting. I mean, just the fact that they outbid some teams for Coletto. They get a player who looks like he could be the replacement for Juszczyk, but if he doesn't make the roster this year, and with 3 quarterbacks and 10 D linemen and maybe 4 tight ends and a deep linebacking core, deep secondary, that maybe he can't make the roster, but they don't want to expose him to waivers. But maybe somebody says, you know what, we'll give you a 6th-round pick or a 7th-round pick for Coletto. I just think it's interesting that they may be able to take a player they didn't even draft, not even play him for a single down, and maybe before week 1, turn him into a 2024 draft choice.
That'd be insane.
Yeah. Interesting, if nothing else. Yeah. The other thing I think is kind of interesting, there was a list put out today on ESPN about the players. I think it was termed the players around the NFL that have been surprise standouts. Did you read the article?
No, I did not.
Ayuk was the Niner, but interestingly enough, there's some other guys that are on this list. One, Marte Mapu, the Sac State kid, has been the surprise standout for New England.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Yeah, right.
The Browns' surprise standout has been Marquise Goodwin, the former Niner.
Who was a 49ers standout in 2017, Cam.
Yeah, I mean, I find that interesting. The Arizona
he played well in Seattle last year, by the way, didn't he?
Yeah, and he's got big-time speed. And then the Arizona Cardinals standout player is the Stanford wide receiver, Michael Wilson, who might have been the best receiver at the Senior Bowl.
Best route runner at the Senior Bowl for sure.
That's interesting. And then the Rams standout player is Puka Nacua from BYU, another receiver that the 49ers in the lead up to the draft, I believe, either met with or worked out. And they showed some interest in Nacua. Now he's in Los Angeles and their standout player. So I just thought that was kind of, and as I mentioned, the Niners standout player of the offseason they list is Brandon Ayuk. And I would agree with that. I think Ayuk has been, incredibly impressive this offseason. So just an angle on, who stood out and that kind of thing. And then I also think it's kind of interesting on the Purdy front, going to Jacksonville, working with the same physical therapist and the same coach that worked on his rotational mechanics and improved his arm strength and velocity on the ball, like 5 miles an hour. He's now back there this week working with those guys as he continues to rehabilitate from the elbow surgery. And I just thought that was interesting. It sounds like, from according to what I'm hearing at least, that Brock is very much on target to, play week 1, September 10th at Heinz Field against Pittsburgh. And now the question is, when do we actually think we may see him? And this whole Breer thing that came up kind of came out of the idea that maybe they'll be really extra careful with him and not play him the first 4 to 6 weeks of the season, which got us into the whole, well, then who would play? And then it's Darnold, and it's like, well, what the heck's going on here? So anyway, I thought those were some of the interesting angles.
I like all of it. I'm surprised that Ayuk was kind of listed as a standout player, as much as I think he's going to have a huge offseason and an excellent season, especially given that he's on a contract year. I felt like he kind of stood out last offseason.
I thought so too. Yeah. I thought so too. And we also have one super here from Glass Half Full guy. He said, is there nothing Lance can do this offseason or preseason to be the week 1 starter? Is it an insurmountable task for Trey? Thanks for the content. What do you think? I mean, it sounds like there's nothing he can do.
No. I think you can never say no, Krug, but I think
it's very
unrealistic. I think it's unrealistic. Like, if he's just coming out, right, Krug, and he is just ripping it in practice, where he's just lighting it up, and every day he's just putting on a show, making big-time throw after big-time throw, it'd be one of those things that everybody would know, right? Like, I do think that if he does that, he could become the starter week 1. But, like, how is he going to turn into a guy that does that between now? You know what I'm saying? Like, the realistic, and this was why I kind of amended my outlook on Trey Lance this offseason. I just found no realistic outlook with his situation for the steps that he needs to take to magically happen. The steps he needs to take are only going to happen if he gets a chance to do what Sam Howell and Desmond Ridder are getting right now, which is they get a full offseason with a young team and they get to be the guy. And they get to prove whether they have the traits to be the future starter or whether they should find someone else, right? And I think Trey Lance needs that. And we are expecting a guy, with less than 600 throws to polish his game and become something that I don't know if he can become unless he gets the opportunity to play. And that's where I would have to say there's really nothing he can do, because I don't see a realistic outlook for him to be able to overtake the guy with the 8-0, the 8 games, all those meaningful games he played with and all of that. It's less about my belief in his upside or how I think he does, more about I don't think the situation is conducive for that for him.
It sounds like this could be a circus. I think we all have to acknowledge that. But yes. let me just say this one. What if Brock is progressing, but they're extra careful and they don't play him in the preseason and they decide they're going to hold him out for 4 to 6 weeks at the beginning of the year? And then what if Trey Lance doesn't get very much time to prove what he is in the preseason because the Niners are going to be – I mean, think about that scenario.
So you're saying in that scenario they've gone all in the preseason prepping week 1 starter Sam Darnold? Is that what you're describing?
Yeah, like, okay, so So that Purdy doesn't play in the preseason, and it's going to be his job. But then it's all about prepping Sam Darnold to play week 1, and the preseason Trey's just getting, kind of not a lot of run. Then I think you're gonna have a lot of people complaining.
Yeah, that's a nightmare scenario across the board for everybody. Yeah.
Isn't it? It is, because then it's like you're giving Trey this window, and that is 3 games in the preseason because he's not going to play in week 1, whether it's Brock or not. So you're giving him this really finite window to show what he's got, but then you also really want to prepare, Darnold, and maybe even Darnold and Allen to play. And maybe what if Allen starts playing really well in the preseason? And now you've got Allen playing well and Darnold playing well. And one of those 2 guys is probably going to start week 1. But then the Trey fans are like, we got to see Trey because this is his 3-week window to make it happen. And what if he gets limited snaps? And it's like, I just think we'll see. We'll see where it goes. But
let's just say that if they don't start 3-0, we could see at that point, I think that there might be, look, Kyle Shanahan's dad was the coach of the Denver Broncos for 8 years. He didn't draft a quarterback for 8 years. He took Jay Cutler, and he was gone in 2 years. And Jay Cutler actually developed under him pretty decently. Like, Jay Cutler's second year under Mike Shanahan was pretty positive, right? That was the year Brandon Marshall, I think, broke the Denver Broncos franchise record in catches. He broke Terrell Owens' singles game record for catches in a game. He had the 21. No, he didn't do that. He did that in Miami. I apologize. I was wrong. But Brandon Marshall had a lot of success, right? And they got rid of him because it was back-to-back years of not making the playoffs. And the year they took Jay Cutler, he was coming off making the AFC Championship game with Jake Plummer. And do you remember who they beat in that 2006 playoffs with Jake Plummer under quarterback at home? They beat the New England Patriots, Tom Brady and Belichick, and they couldn't stop the run game. And they gave him a lot of problems and all of that. So it's interesting to me when we talk about this because his dad went through a situation where he lost his job after building up so much equity for a franchise because they drafted a quarterback and they gave the quarterback another chance at a coach before they gave him another chance at a different quarterback. And I think that that's why there's a little bit of reluctancy to put Trey Lance on the field. And I do think that in a situation where they're not winning games with Trey Lance, in a situation where they're winning games with Trey Lance playing, I think that actually I'm not going to speculate because I'm not 100% sure about this now that I think about it. But I will just say that I think that Shanahan's perception amongst fans would get dicey pretty fast based on my perception of how fans seem to feel about this situation. That's important because that is truly based on my perception of what I read between YouTube, Twitter, all these things on how I think fans are perceiving the situation, which might not actually talk for the greater fan base. But
last point I want to make, and tell me what you think of this. We are doing this show on YouTube. Both of us are on Twitter.
Okay.
When I go outside that structure and I go interview people who are old media people or people who, that aren't necessarily as big on Twitter or YouTube, I'm getting a much more anti-Lance vibe than when I'm. So I almost feel like we're in an area on YouTube and on Twitter that distorts. I mean, look at the reaction Brock Purdy gets when he goes to Giants games.
Right.
I think the rank and file Giants or Niner fan that also is a Giants fan is all in on Brock Purdy. And yet when we do these kinds of forums and we get the chat going and we have the different content creators, I just get this overwhelming push for Trey. And it feels very, very almost 50-50. Let's call it 60-40. Let's call it 60-40 Purdy over Lance. But then when you take Purdy out of the equation and it becomes a Lance Darnold thing, then I feel like, Vish, it's like a 90-10 pro Lance position against Darnold.
I don't even know if it's a pro Lance position or a pro Purdy position, but there's an anti Darnold sentiment.
An anti Darnold.
Sure. I've noticed. Yeah.
If Purdy starts week 1, I think, all the content creator people that
Everybody
are pro Lance can be fine with it. If Darnold starts, oh my God, people are going to lose their mind. And if Brandon Allen starts, if Brandon Allen were to start, Vish, and my scouting buddy told me that in the scouting community, there's lots of people that believe that Brandon Allen is the second best quarterback the Niners have.
Yeah, right. I did hear you mention that. I think this is Eric's first time. I think this is Eric's first time watching our show, because if you know me and Krug, we usually wrap up the show for about 30 to 40 minutes. That's how we do it. Yeah. But I going back to the scenario you proposed, I think the reason I brought up, it could get dicey for Shanahan is because that would be the scenario where you play Darnold. And if you're not winning with Darnold and Purdy is hurt at that point and Lance isn't playing because you're playing Darnold and you're not winning, oh man, people are going to be mad. Oh man, they're going to be mad. And it could be a situation as much as like, do you remember when fans wanted Nick Mullins to be benched in 2020?
Yes.
And it was like, if you benched him for Beathard, well, it turns out Beathard was that much more incompetent than Nick Mullins, who was not an NFL quarterback.
Yes.
It could be one of those situations where Darnold might be the best option and Darnold might stink.
I mean, it's a wild discussion. It can go in any direction, but to me, it's really, really clear that Purdy is a made man among the hardcore Niner fans. They really believe in Purdy. But I don't say hardcore. That's kind of a weird way of saying it. There's the non-YouTube, non-Twitter Niner audience is all in on Purdy. But if you get out of the, if it goes to Lance versus Darnold or Lance versus Allen, all I got to say is if they go with Darnold or Allen over Trey Lance, I hope those guys play well. Because I think there'll be a lot of pushback. I
think even if they play well and lose, there will be conversation a certain kind of way. But if they play poorly and win, Niners fans don't care. How many times did Jimmy Garoppolo play shitty before the Niners won? Let's just go back and watch the first 7 games of 2019. My God. Do you remember that little rub fade they tried to do with the flat and a fade? It was a bad route concept. But do you remember the ball he threw to get picked off by Marcus Peters in the first Rams game in 2019?
Yeah.
This previous play also missing Tevin Coleman in the flat where they had it perfect, one-on-one. You get a 0 blitz. Leak Coleman out to the flat, had him wide open, and he throws the ball a yard in front of him. God.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable, man. Unbelievable. That second Rams pick that pick against the Rams, the Marcus Peters one, just blows my mind. Of course, the worst one was probably the Vernon Hargreaves pick 6 from week 1 when he just flat-footed, blind, nothing behind the ball, throws a little 5-yard stop route from the top of his own end zone with no urgency.
It's funny. Mark Hope says the Niners don't. He says, Vish, the Niners don't have a Super Bowl caliber roster, which I would disagree with.
I disagree with that profusely.
Actually, he says, especially on defense, they can't get off the field when it counts. They were the number 1 defense in the NFL last year, Mark, and number 1 against the run.
Yeah, that's crazy to me.
Yeah, that's
that. And the Niners defense has not been the reason why the Niners. See, when we talk about defense, all of these things, I think it becomes hey, we see the trees, but we don't see the forest. Because the reason all of these minor details with the defense are so relevant to us is because the Niners didn't have a quarterback in any of these games that could compensate for minor misses, right? Like, do we not forget that in the NFC Championship game, the Rams surrendered a 18-play drive with 18 runs?
Yes. I'll say this too. I mean, when I saw the Niners lose to the Chiefs, last year. It was last year at home,
Yeah.
right? And I thought to myself one thing: the Niners, whether they have a good defense or not, whether they have a great defense or not, they're not going to be a legit Super Bowl contender until they can put up 30 points a game. And then here came Brock Purdy at the end of the year, and sure enough, he's putting up 30 points a game. And I don't know. I don't know how that NFC Championship game was going to go. It's loser talk to say you would have won and this and that, but I think it's I'm really eager to see what the Niners look like this year, because I think Wilkes definitely is going to commandeer the back end. I think you're going to see real improvement on the back end of their defense. Hargrave is going to add a ton up front. They've got a big time running game, and they've got a quarterback, if he's healthy, who averaged 33 a game as a rookie, and he's getting better. Regardless of what anybody else may say, he's getting better. So to me, they've got a real shot. And, I'll say this too. And we had John Lund on the show last night, and John sits with Greg on their show, and they do that show together. John's also informed, has his own Niner sources, and he's around the facility from time to time when he's not doing radio. And John said, look, the people that I'm talking to around the Niners this year they're always about the Super Bowl, but they are so determined and borderline desperate to get this thing done. And I get that exact same feeling around the team. There is an uneasiness, there's a tension, there's a from the players, the coaches, Shanahan, Lynch, there is a, like, they know that they're in their Super Bowl window. They know they've gotten close. They know that they've been short for the quarterback because of the quarterback position on more than one occasion. And there is like a extra angst, an extra fire, an extra whatever you want to call it. Super Bowl or bust. They will not be happy. I can say it definitively, Fish. They will not be happy with a Super Bowl appearance this year. This year is about they win the Super Bowl or they're miserable. And I know it's a miserable existence to some degree, right? Because you're going to fail. There's only I saw the other day, Vish, there's only an 11% chance they win the Super Bowl. So that means there's an 89% chance they're going to lose the Super Bowl. So if you're in this camp going, well, they're probably going to lose. Yeah, they are probably going to lose. If that's your standard, Super Bowl or bust, you have an 89% chance of being right. If you're sitting there going, they can't do it, they won't do it. Right. But that's where they're at. They are so all in this year that it's like, I want to say it's misery, but it's like dogged determination. We'll see.
Shout out to my guy, Bay Area Baller 18 in the chat. Make
Baller in the house. Love Baller. He's a great guy.
Absolutely. But Larry, I think that's our show.
Yeah.
What a show it is. What an ending with you explaining to us how urgent the 49ers are about winning the Super Bowl. What are you thinking? Next Tuesday? When are we back?
Next Tuesday. How about next Tuesday? We'll break it down.
On July 4th?
Is that July 4th?
Yeah, I think it is. Do you have any plans?
Oh, yeah. No, I do. I'm a pyromaniac. I like to I live in Contra Costa County, and they don't allow us to blow stuff up in Contra Costa County, and I follow the rules. But my brother lives in Natomas in a different county, and they do allow fireworks. Okay. And even though my brother's a judge and very, very, very quiet and respectful and that kind of thing, this is the 4th of July is the one day of the year where it's like, let's blow stuff up. My brother is a huge pyro. So we're going to be doing a little barbecue at his house. So maybe, what do you think of July 5th? How about next Wednesday?
Let's do Wednesday. Sounds good to me.
All right, brother.
All right. Thank you, Krug. This was awesome. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Careful.